Today we'll be sewing McCall's 6886 dress. Hi, I'm Alex and this is Gingerhead & Co, my sewing vlog. In today's Sew With Me, a quick, easy and super comfortable dress. McCall's 6886, that's view D. And the only change to the pattern that I made is that I finished my neckline and the armholes with ribbing. I cut my ribbing 25% shorter than the corresponding opening, but anywhere between 20 and 27% will be fine if you are using ribbing, because ribbing has really good recovery. I constructed the dress on the Overlocker, but you can use your domestic sewing machine. Just remember to use stretch stitch. In this tutorial, we are also going to top stitch and hem using a cover stitch machine. Of course, you can do it on your domestic sewing machine using a small zigzag. If you prefer, you can finish the armholes using a cover stitch like I did in my top from the same pattern, or as pattern suggests, using a narrow hem. Turn under again, and top stitch. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to see more. First, I'm going to sew the neckband and the armhole bands. My bands are cut to the length of 75% of the corresponding opening. I use triple stretch stitch. First, fold each band with right sides together and sew. Press or finger press the seam allowances open. The bands will then be turned to the right side and folded along the long edge before we attach them to the dress. I sew with a small seam allowance, so it's 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Then we open the seam allowances and we're going to fold it along the longer edge. Our bands are now prepared and we can move on to constructing the dress. And for that I'm going to use my Overlocker. First, we are going to sew the shoulder seams. If, like me, you are using your Overlocker, remember to adjust your seam allowances. My Overlocker seam allowances are 7 millimeters, but I allow 1 millimeter to be cut off because my fabric I just roll and it's harder to be precise. So altogether, my seam allowances here are 8 millimeters, 1/3 of an inch. I use satin ribbon to stabilize the shoulder seam. I place it at the back of the shoulder seam and sew through all the layers. The fabric I use is cotton jersey with 5% of spandex. The satin ribbon means the seams won't stretch at all. You can stabilize your seams with interfacing, clear elastic or cotton tape if you prefer. And I do the same for the other shoulder seam. I like this method because it's quick and I like the look. This satin ribbon is 6 millimeters wide, so it's perfect. Now I'm going to sew the side seams. I'm going to sew from the hem up, as this dress has a hip curve and is wider at the hem. Sewing from the hem to the armhole makes it easier to prevent any stretching. I divide my seams into sections as I sew, constantly adjusting by lifting both layers slightly up. Using pins with a machine that goes 6,000 or 7,000 stitches per minute is not advisable. And now we are going to sew the other side seam in precisely the same way. So starting from the hem, going up. And you can also make sure that your hem is perfectly straight. Our dress is almost ready. We can try it on to check the fit. I'm going to attach the bands now. So the neckband and the armhole bands. I'm folding them along the longer edge with the right side up. So the right side of the ribbing is up. I'm dividing my bands in halves, but you can divide yours into quarters if it's easier for you. And my clips mark the halves. You can make notches if you prefer. I'm going to match seams, so the band seam with one of the shoulder seams of the dress. So I divide my neck opening in halves, starting from the shoulder seam that is going to be matched with the seam on the neckband. Then the neckband is going to be placed inside the neck opening. The clips that marked my halves match. Right sides together, so the folded ribbing right side matches the right or pretty side of the garment. We're going to pull on the ribbing on the band slightly as we sew. I start sewing just before my matched seams. Make sure that the seams are aligned in the seam allowance. They should match in the seam allowance. And sew. And the neckband is done. Everything matches prettily. So the seams are aligned. I'm not sure if you can see it, but they are aligned here. And we can do our armhole bands in the same way. So folding along the long edge, dividing into halves, and matching the seams. So placing the bands into the garment and matching, I match the bottom seam. And as we sew, we're going to pull slightly, precisely in the same manner. Just remember, right sides together. Ribbing has the right side as well. So right side of the ribbing to the right side of the dress. And the seams need to match in the seam allowance. and one armhole is done. The seams are matching perfectly. We're going to do the same thing with the other armband. And I'm going to speed it up a bit because you're going to get bored. It's precisely the same process. All the bands are now done. I'm going to show you that the seams are matching perfectly, so it's doable and it looks really nice. Before we move to the cover stitch to do top stitching and hemming, I'm going to show you quickly how to press the hem using a pressing ruler. Mine is from Prym, but hemline or Dritz make the same ruler too. You simply fold your hem over the template and you press, and it's quite helpful. It's a very simple thing, but I think it helps. It's not expensive. My hem is going to be 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. I'm going to top stitch all my bands. The seam allowances are down. I'm sewing through all the layers. I'm using 3 needles cover stitch. I'm using quite thick needles, so 90, 14 as UK, but check your machine. Always check your manual for the needles that you can use. My stitch length is 4, my presser foot pressure is high. The tension is just around 3.5 for all the needles. Looper on medium and differential on 0. I'm going to finish in the round, that's why I'm flipping my threads. And I'm going to overlap the stitches, so I'm using the guides on my foot to make sure that I'm quite precise. So my first and last stitch overlap, and it looks quite neat. And I'm going to do precisely the same thing to the armbands. The seam allowances are down, and just go. Snip your beginning threads to overlap the first and the last stitch. And the stitches overlap. And finally the other armband in the same way. Seam allowances are down, and we're going in the round, overlapping the first and the last stitch. And it looks like this. I'll try not to move it. And finally we can hem the dress. We've got the hem pre-pressed. I'm only using guides on my machine, but if you prefer you can use the Lego block or a special hem guide. I actually use my fingers all the time, especially my thumb, to check if there is a bump. And you can't go wrong because you know if you are covering the hem or not. You can feel it with your thumb, but you can feel the double thickness of the fabric. And I'm going to overlap the first and the last stitch as always. And it's all done, that's the hem. Don't worry if you have some excess, you can always trim it later. Especially if you just started using a cover stitch, don't worry about the excess. It's better to have a bit of excess than not cover the hem. And that's me, proudly wearing my new dress made in half an hour. Nobody would believe that you could make this dress in half an hour. It's super comfortable, I absolutely love it.